Hi everyone, and thank you for watching our second StewTalk video. So, my name's Ian Ableson. I'm the Stewardship Manager for Six Rivers Land Conservancy. We're a nonprofit land conservancy that protects natural lands throughout southeast Michigan. We operate in 5 counties, Oakland, Macomb, Lapeer, and Genesee counties. And for this StewTalk, we're actually going to be doing something a little different. I know it's a little weird to change up the formula when it's only the second video, but we had planned throughout the spring of 2020 to do a few night hikes at some of our preserves throughout southeast Michigan, and that's no longer going to be a possibility. So while there's no real replacement for seeing the stars in front of you in the sky, there's still some stuff we can talk about in video format that I hope you'll all find interesting and informative. So there's a lot of stuff that you can talk about with astronomy. You can go over geology, chemistry, physics, the actual constellations. You can talk about the mythology behind them. But we are going to start today with something a little more approachable and hopefully fairly interesting as well, and that's the North Star. So you've probably heard of the North Star before. It's throughout stories, throughout history. It's something that we know was really important for seafaring, for a lot of people who were sailing on the oceans well before there were easier forms of navigation. So if you want to sort of follow along with the video today as our sort of replacement for the night sky, there's a website you can go to. So I'm going to direct you to a link and also put it in the description of this video, and that's timeandDate.com/astronomy/night/USA/Troy. And then if you go to that page and scroll down a little bit, you'll see a screen that's a representation of the sky in Troy, Michigan, which is in Oakland County in southeast Michigan, at about the time and date that you're watching the video. So you can change the time and date on that screen and be able to mess with the constellations, mess with the night sky, and see what would be visible in Troy at whatever date and time you've input. For the purposes of this video, it's going to be any date that you want, but for the time, just make sure it's sometime at night that you'd be able to see the stars. So 9 p.m., 12 a.m., 3 a.m., anything like that is fine. So on that screen, after you've changed the time, right around the arrow that says north, there's probably a constellation directly above it. But if you click and drag on the screen and scroll up and go above that constellation, you should be able to pretty easily find Ursa Minor. So Ursa Minor, the little bear, is also affectionately referred to as the Little Dipper because of its shape, where it appears to be a big old spoon in the sky. And Ursa Minor is the constellation that contains the North Star. Now, there are a lot of myths about the North Star, that it's the brightest star in the sky, which is not true. That's Sirius. That it's never changed throughout history. That's also not true. The North Star actually changes over a time period of a few thousand years in a process called precession that maybe we'll talk about in a later video. But the North Star is called Polaris. It's something like the 50th brightest star in the sky, and it's only the North Star right now and maybe for the next couple thousand years. It'll change eventually. It'll shift from our viewpoint in the sky. So, first things first, want to talk about why Polaris works as the North Star, because it's not necessarily intuitive why you can look at this one star in the sky and walk towards it and you're always walking north. So, for these purposes, pretend that this orange is Earth, and pretend that this eraser is the North Star, Polaris. So on Earth, we have the South Pole and the North Pole, and in relative position, Polaris would be right about here, directly above the North Pole, separated by a distance of about 430 some light years. And that's why if you imagine standing anywhere on the northern hemisphere of Earth and walking towards the North Star, you would also be walking along the curvature of Earth towards the North Pole. Now, I did say in the northern hemisphere. So the North Star is actually really only functional as a navigational aid in the northern hemisphere, because if you imagine standing anywhere along the southern hemisphere, you can't see the North Star and walk towards it. You'd have to look through the Earth. And unfortunately, there's actually no good equivalent of the Southern Star in the Southern Hemisphere. There is a star in about the location that the Southern Star ideally would be, but unfortunately, that star is too dim for it to be really practical as a Southern Star. So navigating in the southern skies would be a little more difficult. Now, the North Star, like I said, right above the North Pole, so if you walk anywhere in the northern hemisphere and you walk towards it, you're walking north. In terms of actually finding it, I want to talk about sort of two different ways to find it, depending on your level of knowledge of where you are. So, first off, finding the North Star if you know which way north is. So, say you live on a north-south road and you're standing on the sidewalk facing north. You will still see a lot of stars potentially in that sliver of sky that might look like they could be the North Star. So, there is one other factor in Michigan that actually makes it somewhat easier for us to see the North Star, and that's our latitude. So whatever your latitude is, if you're standing, again, anywhere in the northern hemisphere, and you look at an angle with the horizon of your latitude, that is the point in the sky where the North Star would be. So, to simplify this, we'll think about the extreme. Imagine that you're standing on the North Pole and looking at the North Star. You would have to look straight up. So, that's about a 90-degree angle with the horizon. And your latitude at the North Pole would be right around 90 degrees. Now, if you imagine standing on the equator, it's actually really hard to see the North Star because ideally you'd have to look at an angle of around 0 degrees, which is straight ahead, but usually wherever you're standing, there's going to be something in the way at that angle. So it's actually kind of hard to see the North Star from the equator. But so in Michigan, we have a latitude, depending on where you are, of around 42 degrees to around 47 degrees if you're all the way up in Copper Harbor. Now that's about half of 90 degrees. So if you stand anywhere in Michigan and look about halfway in between the horizon and looking straight up, that should be about the distance where the North Star will be, which is great. But, you know, let's say you're trying to find the North Star and you don't know approximately which way north is. So you got helicoptered to a field somewhere, dropped off in the field, and now you're trying to find the way north. Well, there are still a couple of things you can do. So the easiest is to find the Big Dipper. The Big Dipper is part of the constellation Ursa Major, and it's the really big spoon in the sky. Now, if you're not practiced at finding the Big Dipper, it's not necessarily always easy, but it is made up of primarily very bright stars. And what that means is if you go out at a time that the light's fading, but you don't have the true sort of darkness of night yet, the Big Dipper is often one of the first constellations, or sorry, one of the first asterisms that you'll be able to see in the sky. One of the first pictures of stars that you can find in the sky. And if you take the Big Dipper and imagine it as that ladle, and you take the two stars at the very front edge of the ladle, draw a line between them, and follow that line, you will also eventually hit the North Star. And from there, it's really easy to orient yourself with the rest of the sky and hopefully be able to navigate from there. So, that's sort of all I've got for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. As soon as it's both safe and responsible to do so, I highly recommend that you check out a planetarium program at one of our lovely planetariums in Southeast Michigan. There's a planetarium at the Cranbrook Institute of Science in Bloomfield Hills. There's one at the Michigan Science Center in Detroit. And there's one at the University of Michigan Museum of Natural History in Ann Arbor. And they all do great programs. If you want to know more about the organization that I work for, Six Rivers Land Conservancy, or if you want to know more about protecting land throughout Southeast Michigan, you can go to our website at sixriversrlc.org. And if you really want to support our mission and you're interested in donating, you can find a donation link on the website as well. Thanks so much, everyone, for watching. Stay safe and stay healthy.